chapter 6 was on quadratics. So you can see a couple different forms. The vertex form was seen here, and then remember the actual vertex was noted by H, comma, K. Standard form, objects in free fall. Remember that this stood for the velocity, and this stood for the initial height. And then remember in feet, we were talking about 32 feet per second, and the meters was 9.8. I'm guessing this is something that you're definitely going to want on your note card, and depending on if you have the quadratic formula memorized, maybe that as well. And imaginary numbers, remember that I squared equals -1. Okay, so those are some note card type things for you. So we'll start with number 1, which meant to expand. If you got the 2 on the outside, that means you need to rewrite another 2x minus 5 and FOIL it out, leaving your 4 alone for right now. So we should get 4x squared minus 10x plus 25. Watch your negatives there. Okay, if you put this middle 2 together, you're going to get a -20x. Then I'll distribute my 4, so my final answer will be 16x squared minus 80x plus 100. Okay, so just remember to FOIL, because that really means that there's 2 of them and not just to distribute there. Number 2 is working with i's. So I have 12 minus a -8. So 12 minus 8 is just 4. And then -6i minus a -4i is really -6i plus 4i, which would be minus a 2i. So that's just working on combining like terms. Number 3, since parentheses are right next to each other, that means to FOIL. So I've got 30 outsides gives me 20i, insides give me minus 12i, and last give me a -8i squared. Again, be sure to watch your negatives here. So if I put together like terms, I've got 30 plus 8i, and then I need to remember that I squared is really a -1. So -8 times -1 means that's a +8. So my final answer would be 38 plus 8i. Okay, so just remember you can have an I or no I's, but no I squareds. Okay, number 4, simplify. So the square root of -25. Now you used to not be able to do that. So what you kind of do is you ignore the negative, you take the square root of it, and then you add an I. So the square root of -25 is 5i. Using that same idea, square root of -81 is 9i. So together those become 45i squared. Again, I squared is -1. So that final answer becomes a -45. So remembering your properties of i's or imaginary numbers. Number 5, solving. First thing I would do here, subtract 14. This is very similar to what you just did in the power chapter. So you've got 4x squared equal a 36. Then you would divide by 4. Very similar to chapter 7 here. X squared is 9. Square root that. That's going to give me, and here is the tricky part here where you're going to lose points on the exam, plus or minus 3. Okay, every time you square root something with an equal sign, you've got a plus or a minus, just like in chapter 7. Okay, number 6, same idea. Divide by -6 first. So I would get x squared equal -81. Again, just watching your negatives. Square root here. Okay, so x equals, again, square rooting. Plus or minus. Okay, 9. And I need the I because I was square rooting a negative. Okay, so lots of things to keep track of here. Square root means a plus or minus. The negative meant I got the I in the end, so be careful here. Number 7 just says how many solutions. Okay, how many can be determined by using just the discriminant, which is the b squared minus 4ac portion of the quadratic formula. So remember that when it's written in standard form, my a, b, and whoopsies, this isn't in standard form yet. So the first thing I should do is add 9 to each side, so it is. So 4x squared minus 12x plus 9 equals 0. Now that it's written in standard form, I know my a is 4, my b is -12, and my c is 9, and then I can plug it into that formula. So I'm going to have -12 squared minus 4 times 4 times 9. And if you simplify that out, you should get 0. Okay, if you don't, again, make sure if you do a negative number, you put that in parentheses and then the squares on the outside. Okay, if the discriminant is 0, remember this is the part that's underneath the square root. So if you plus or minus to the square root of 0, you are just going to get one answer. Okay, Let's try part B. Again, let's get this in standard form first. So I would add over my 8x and I would add over my 24, so it's set equal to 0. Now I know my A is 9, my B is 8, and my C is 24. So I'm going to have 8 squared minus 4 times 9 times 24. If I do that out, I'm going to get negative 800. Okay, so if you square root a negative, you don't usually get an answer. Okay, so what I would say is no real solutions, because we could have imaginaries, but usually these are dealing with the path of a ball where negatives don't make sense. So we would say no real solutions. The only other opportunity or option here would be as if this number came out positive. So any positive answer is 2 real solutions. Okay, so it's either 2, none, or 1, as you saw before. Okay, maybe no card type things. Number 8 says to solve 15x squared plus 7 plus or equals 3x. So probably want to get this into standard form. So 15x squared minus 3x plus 7 equals 0. Okay, you can't just square root this like we did the earlier ones, because you have an x squared and an x. If you have an x squared and an x, get it in your brain that that's when you have to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so if I put that in the quadratic formula, that's going to give me 3 plus or minus square root of negative 3 squared minus 4 times 15 times 7 all over 2 times 15. Okay, first thing you're going to do is to plug that whole stuff in your calculator here. Okay, and unfortunately in this one you're going to get the square root of a negative, so we have no solutions here. Okay, number 9 says to write in standard form. So this looks a lot like the first question here, where the first thing we had to do was take care of this 2 by writing another x plus 3 and then foiling, again leaving that 4 until later. So it's going to give me x squared plus 3x plus 3x plus 9. If I put my x's together, that gives me a 6x. So now I have y minus 8 equals 4x squared plus 24x plus 36, distributing that 4 all the way through. Standard form wants my y to be alone, so I'm going to add 8 to each side at this point, and then adding it to my value at the end. So I'm going to get 4x squared plus 24x plus 44. Okay, so you got to get it all kind of expanded out and then in standard form. Okay, number 10 says to find the vertex of that, okay, which meant we completed the square. So this is complete square. I know you didn't like this, but we'll try and remember anyways. First thing we're going to do is move this number at the end. So I'll have y minus 73 equals x squared minus 16x. The next thing I had to do is look at the number on my x. Okay, I had to divide it by 2, and then I had to square it, and that was the same for all of those. So 16 divided by 2 is 8, 8 squared is 64. And the next thing I did is add that number to each side. So I've got y minus 73 plus 64 equals x squared minus 16x plus 64. Okay, from here on the left side, you're just going to simplify together. So you're going to get y minus 9 equals, and then on this right side, you needed to get it to look like this, x something something squared. Okay, you are always going to take this sign right there, so minus, and then the number is always the square root of the last number, so x minus 8 squared. Now that it's in vertex form, it should be pretty easy to see that our vertex is 8, 9. Okay, always taking a look at what's being subtracted from the x first and then from the y. Okay, number 11 is the same idea, only we have a number in front of our x squared here, which is going to make things a little bit interesting. So the first thing I'm going to do is, again, subtract over my 4. And then on my right side, I'm going to divide both of these by 2. And I'm going to leave it on the outside. So I'm going to have x squared minus 3x. Now at this point, since I have that kind of subtracted or sided out, I'm going to take my 3, I'm going to divide that number by 2, and then I'm going to square it. So that's going to give me 2.25. Now when I add that in on the right side, I'm going to have x squared minus 3x plus 2.25. But on the left side, I'm going to have y minus 4 plus 2.25 times 2, because you need to take into effect that the 2 is being multiplied by the 2.25. Okay, if you don't multiply by the 2, it's not going to be balanced equation. So on the left side again, you're just going to put all that together, and that's going to give you a half. And then on the right side, you're going to leave the 2 alone. I'm going to have x. Okay, my sign right here is a negative, and then again I'm square rooting the number at the end, so that's going to be a 1.5. Okay, squared, so my vertex here is 1.5, negative 0.5. Okay, and then if you want to graph these to kind of double check if you're on the right path, that's probably a pretty good idea. So if I look at 12, it says write the equation of y equals 5x squared after it shifted 4 units to the right and 3 units down. Okay, so the new vertex will be 4 to the right and 2 units down, so it'll be 4, negative 2. The new axis of symmetry then would go through my new vertex, so that would be 4. Okay, and then I'm going to sketch my new parabola. So I've got positive 4, negative 2 is down here. My axis of symmetry is going to go right down through there. And then if you remember, we made an XY chart and then we plugged in numbers that were either to the left or the right of our new equation. So probably 5, but we haven't written our equation yet. So that would be y, remember it's opposite, so y plus 2 equals, my 5 stays out front, and then x minus 4 squared. Okay, so kind of working backwards from your new vertex, it's opposite in there. So if I plug in 5 to that equation, for x, I'm going to have 5 minus 4 is 1. 1 squared is 1. Times 5 is 5. And then I'd have to subtract my 2 over there, so it'd be 3. So if I've got 5, 3. Did I do that right? Yeah, 5, 3. I'd be up here. And then that would be reflected over my line right over there. So there would be my parabola. Again, it is not cheating to use your graphing calculator to check your work here. Okay, so check your work. Number 13, same idea, shifted 7 units to the right and 3 units down, so write the new equation. So that would be y plus 2 equals negative 1/6, and then x minus 7 squared. Remember, it seemed kind of backwards at the time. So if it said 7 units to the right, it was a minus 7, and then down is a plus 2. So kind of backwards there. So sketch it, so that would be at 7, negative 2. Negative 2 would be here. Axis of symmetry would go right through there. And then you could kind of make your XY chart again, or graph it in your calculator. Maybe you plug in 8 this time. So 8 minus 7 is 1. 1 squared times negative 1/6. Minus 2 would be negative 2 1/6. So that would be a little lower here. And then we would have this looking parabola here. Okay, so then my range would be below that vertex. So it'd be y less than or equal to negative 2. Excellent. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at 14. Here is a new parabola, and it is translated from 0, 0. So it usually goes through 0, 0. Now it's going through 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's going through negative 4, 2. So the translation would literally just be that negative 4, 2. The equation is to write it in then. So y minus 2 equals 2, and then x minus a negative 4 becomes x plus 4 squared. The domain of all parabolas is x equals all real, and the range be either, it used to be greater than or equal to 0, but now it's going to be greater than or equal to 2, because that's where our vertex point is. Okay, a couple more. You guys are doing great. 15, a ball is launched with a velocity of 8 meters per second from a height of 6.4 meters. Write the equation that describes the height of the ball after t seconds. So that was the h equals, that kind of long formula that was written on the front page, object in free fall. So we've got negative 1/2 times g. We're talking in gravity here. Since we're talking in meters, we're going to plug in 9.8 t squared plus my initial velocity of 8. So that's 8t plus my initial height, which is going to be 6.4. If I kind of simplify that, that's going to give me negative 4.9 t squared plus 8t plus 6.4. Okay, and the question then says, when will the ball be 8 meters high? So that means I would plug in 8 for my h, and then I would have to solve. So the first thing I'd have to do here is subtract 8 from each side. So I would have 0 equals negative 4.9 t squared plus 8t minus 1.6. And hopefully you have realized at this point, a t squared and a t is the quadratic formula. Okay, I'm hoping you can set that up on your own, so please do try this and check. You should get 2.3 or 1.4 seconds. Okay, so check to make sure you can get that to work out. And finally, 16, a rocket is launched from a building that is 65 feet tall with an initial velocity of 12 feet per second. Write the equation that describes the height. So h equals negative 1/2. G is gravity. This time we're dealing in feet, so that's 32 t squared plus my initial velocity, which is 12t, plus my initial height, which is 65. So that's going to be h equals negative 16t squared plus 12t plus 65. And the question is, when will the rocket hit the ground? Well, ground is a height of 0, so I'd plug in 0 here and also use the quadratic formula. This time you only better get one answer because it can only hit the ground once. So this one should be 2.425. The negative answer is negative 1.675, but remember you cross it off and then you just give me the positive one. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 6. Good job.